Bush's quest for realignment. Democrats had seemed to be in control since the mid-1960s. They had been in control of both of the houses of Congress since the New Deal. In the 1970s and the 1980s, many of the Republicans' strategists hungered for realignment. Their hopes depended on getting the Southern voters and many blue-collar voters to shift from Democrat to the Republican Party. Bush believed that the decade of the 1960s, American values had been corrupted. He believed it had been ushered into a drug culture, a far-left political ideology, and a runaway welfare state. Bush was portraying himself as a family man during the elections of the 2000s, a man who could unite the nation. He had support from the conservatives by pledging a huge tax cut of $1.3 trillion spread over the 10 years. W. Bush had won the election, but Gore had the more popular vote, and he had about a significant amount. Now the Americas were divided. If Bush's followers tended to be more religious, while the Gore followers were more secular. Bush was now proposing a $1.7 trillion tax cut. Bush argued that the tax cut would stimulate the lagging economy, but others knew that this was not true. Almost 40% of the tax cut would only benefit the top 1%. President Bush had declared war due to the aftermath of September 11th. After that, there were also drastic measures took to decrease the risk of further terrorist attacks. The Congress had enacted the U.S. Patriot Act in October 2001, which was able to give law enforcement agencies expanded powers of surveillance over communications within and outside the United States. In January 2002, the proposal for No Child Left Behind was finally enacted. This meant that students would be tested in reading and math to monitor to see if the students' test scores had improved. Bush returned to his domestic agenda in 2003. He proposed another $7 billion tax cut. It was argued that the benefits would go to the top 10 of the nation's most affluent people. The tax cut was passed. His tax, international, domestic, and counterterrorism had radically changed America's national priorities for those of Clinton. It said about $3.4 trillion was taken from the federal budget in the coming decade that might otherwise have been used for the domestic programs. These policies resulted in a huge increase in the federal debt. Also, the combined cost of the Social Security and Medicare could rise because seniors were expected to live longer. Liberals and some conservatives feared that the nation was headed for a grim scenario. They feared that programs funded by the federal discretionary portion of the budget might be slashed. Bush had won the election in 2004. He relied heavily on the argument that he could best safeguard the nation from terrorism. He persuaded many independent and moderate voters to vote for him, while retaining the allegiance of persons with relatively strong religious affiliations. The 2000 elections would most likely be determined by the voters' perception of the course of the Iraq War. Democrats were wanting a rapid and complete withdrawal from Iraq. President Bush's war on terrorism had raised a lot of troubling questions. The war in Iraq had inflicted death and injury on over 1 million residents in both countries, and there was little evidence that the war had advanced any interest in the U.S.